I will try in the next hour to do it. One is I plan to method that I prepare but one thing that I was told when I was a grad student, that I think hopefully will help you when you make your choices in future career in academia. It's one thing. The second thing I want to tell you a little bit about research that I think answers question that I was interested in for a while and finally get to play with it. And I combine it with maybe one or two stories that are personal that I thought would be this unique opportunity to speak at stage, which is not just a regular talk of academia, but also some personal experiences that I thought would be interesting to talk about. So, I think of the research that I'm doing in the realm of consciousness is a chance to leave my childhood. So when I was a kid, it's the same for in California, but I lived in a very small place where it was common for kids to hang out with their parents, and we used to do bonfires outside my school and talk about things like the meaning of life. I took this little footage from a movie that I think tells a story beautifully called Stand By Me, when you see the kids sitting at the bonfire and they kind of say, we spoke about important things, and then you hear them talk about kind of goofy a dog or a horse, and how do we know that? And to me, what kind of reminded me of all that is that there's a note that I wrote back when I was less than 12 years old, on with a list of things that I thought would be interesting to understand. And I think that it's not going to be different than, or pretty much feel that if you go to academia, you probably have similar list and probably similar items. And I thought as a kid, kind of, I want to know what wings fall and kind of how far can you predict an actions before it happens? And are there aliens? And one of those things was consciousness. So even as a kid, I probably didn't call it this way, but it was clear to me that there's something that I want to understand about what makes humans different than machines and how it works and so on. In that sense, I feel that much of kind of what I get to do as an adult is talk to this kind of 12-year-old Moran and respond to his questions on what's interesting. And I'll say that to me, one of the moments that I really got to enjoy the joint kind of experience of being both this kid and adult in one was actually several years ago when I was in Los Angeles getting a graduate degree. When one day I walked at the single road at Caltech, a very small university, and saw a sign that asked for graduate students to volunteer their time. It was not volunteering, you got paid, but you got paid so little that I think it went by as volunteer. You got, I think, less than, I don't remember the number, but less than $20 for you to read a 150-page script in Hollywood and put science everywhere. So the idea is that you watch a Hollywood film, if it has science in it, many times they want to be very accurate and precise in the jargon. So they hire scientists, kind of read the script, and it says, Dr. House is XCC of Y, and then you kind of are told to put science here. And then you're supposed to do to go to Wikipedia and kind of find the correct answer. And I did it a while. It was very slavery type of job in the sense of like how much it pays and how much it works. So I was the only one who survived for many years. And this led to me now to this date, 17 years after, still every now and then getting scripts for Hollywood and working in Hollywood to write scripts. So I think that this was a very kind of taxing job that I did back then. But the reason I'm saying that is because it, in many ways, informed my research to date. People in Hollywood are not bounded by what we know. So when I spend time with those writers and kind of help them think about what should the characters do, they suggest things that many times I say, steal this idea and go try it in the lab. And many of the ideas that I think are floating among our labs right now are ideas that those people in science fiction kind of thought about 20 years ago, and we grew up on them. And maybe, to me, one of those ideas that I really find relevant was the idea that came when I was working on a TV show. Back then, it was a film. It's turned into a TV show called Limitless. Limitless was a TV show, maybe 10 years ago, less. It's a TV show based on a movie. The movie was based on a book by that name. And the book was based on a different book by different. book, film, TV series. And what's nice about this kind of journey is that each book and film continues the previous one. It's not like they just adapted it. So one person wrote a book, another person wrote a continuing book, and then the film continues where the book ends, and the TV series continues where the film ends. So you really have like a wall of characters, and you have to speak to them. I got a call from Hollywood when the series was already aired. So they already filmed 4 episodes out of 24. And they were every week filming a new one. And they said, here's the thing. If you don't know anything about this TV show, I'll kind of spoil just the kind of premise. There's a character there and a magical pill that he can take. And when he takes this pill, he gets control of his brain. He becomes the smartest person ever. He remembers every thought he had. He's able to solve all problems. And he's becoming kind of like a FBI agent where every time there's a problem, he takes the pill, gets smart, solves the problem. And then the pill is worked off and he becomes again this silly person before. And the way they plan the book, film, book, and TV series is that there's also some adversarial reactions to the pill. So he gets sick and kind of very less and less healthy. And it's clear that if he doesn't find by the end of the series his antidote, he's going to die. So they have to kind of, in the middle of the series, have this big arc where he tries to find this thing that's going to actually explain what the pill really does to you. And when they come in, they said, look, we have this thing where we're building towards episode 24, we're going to explain how the pill works and what it does. And the thing is, we have no idea. So we bring you and we ask you to come up with an answer. So we have only 4 episodes filmed, and you have this film and the books, figure out what it does. So I was basically given hours to read the 2 books, watch the movie and the 4 episodes, and come up with some answers to what could tie everything together. And there are a lot of constraints. He cannot run faster, but he can think faster, and he can. So there are a lot of things that I had to kind of put together. And not only that, there were tons of blog websites with fans who actually had speculations. So I had to kind of read all of those and see, oh, what kind of, this person says great, but this person says it's not going to work because of this. So I had to kind of learn all of that in order to come up with something. I'll give just a quick note that I came up with a brilliant answer that I thought would be amazing. And I gave it to them like after a few hours and I said, here is the answer. This should be, and they said, it's amazing. It's really, really good. And then I, like everyone else, went home and watched the show. And when episode 24 aired, it wasn't there. Oh. And I kind of called the director. I said, like, what's going on? Where is it? They said, it was so amazing that we loved it so much that we decided to put it in season 2. And then you're canceled. So no one's ever gonna know. If you want, I can tell you afterwards what was my brilliant solution. But the point of that is that it really made me think about what would be kind of the possibility if you really push the brain to the limit. And some of the work I'm going to tell today, I think, is influenced by this project. So Act 1 is me talking about the brain. Act 2 will be me mentioning how we kind of try to use the same thing in machines. Here's the background to what I'm going to talk about in the first part of science. There was a lot of work that looks at the brain as a series of, or combination of all molecules do things together. And many colleagues of mine, including students of mine, worked in the business side of our lab, are trying to see, can we find synchrony between brains? Can we find something about how similar my brain is and Jonathan's brain when we look at content and understand if the content is actually driving the brainwaves in the same way? There are work about animals, brains consensus. You can look at bees flying together or school of fish, and it seems like they somehow, in very fast speed, are able to steer the entire school in one direction. And you can ask the question, what's going on there? Who's driving it, or how the brain perfectly synchronized? What's kind of, is there a collective knowledge here that somehow kind of genetically comes about that they all possessed? When I started my career, I was interested in epilepsy as a disorder before it became a vehicle to do research. And seizures, in a way, to me, are the ultimate thing. It's one of the few moments in life where your brain essentially becomes, if you look at a seizure, the brain's cells, like it looks like all the brain is in one thing in concert. So that to me is like counterintuitive. You think of kind of synchrony as like this perfect thing, but brain-wise, when everything works together, it's actually a flaw of the brain, and you want to break synchrony, and kind of the entire world of seizures trying to prevent this synchrony or get the person out of the synchrony, so all the modules work together. And so when we think of the brain, we typically think about it as like one unit that's all, but more and more we see that there may be modules that do things separately, and you want to find kind of this police officer that synchronizes them, or mechanism that kind of says, hey, how does it all work together? And when you look at consciousness, there are people, and I think some of them spoke here, that have theories that speak on consciousness as kind of something that's relevant to them. maybe there's one entity that kind of drives all the conversation, or maybe there are some modules in the brain that when they're in sync, your conscious or not. And I think that if you probably follow the research on consciousness, you will see that it's kind of hand-waving about the fact that modules synchronizing is important, is aligned with what you hear from people like Tononi, from people like one of my students, Michael, who basically tried to look at all kinds of animals and see which ones show more and less synchrony in the brain in different states. And mostly my kind of academic grandfather, Francis Crick, who essentially early in his career in consciousness, when he kind of went there and started looking at it, spoke about this part of the brain, which he called the NCC, the neural part of the consciousness, this one location. He even suggested where it should be, that somehow administers this synchrony between all parts. And if you can figure it out, you find the seat of consciousness. Now, he named a part of the brain, he advocated for people looking for this part of the brain, but altogether, they all said there's something about this kind of ability to collect all the modules in the brain that are basically individual and putting them into one holistic component that will be consciousness. And in many ways, some of the work I'm going to show you tries to go after this NCs. Now, many people here are studying psychology, so you're probably familiar with this one. If you're not, I'm going to mention it in a second, but not going to go through the entire experience. This is a picture that's flickering, but if you don't know the story, it's not really one picture, it's two pictures that are kind of alternating, and there's one element that changes between those pictures, and if you know it, you see it right away. If you don't know it, you have a second to figure it out. What's important is that whether you know it or don't, whether you don't, your brain does. So in your brain, even if you don't see and you kind of keep looking to see, maybe it's the Canada flag, maybe it's the red on this soldier, maybe it's the windows. If I'm telling you that there's something changing, your brain is seeking for it. But somewhere in your brain, all the photons from the images kind of blast into your retina, and your brain actually has neurons or that code the differences. So you can see the entire picture. Somewhere there are photons that appear in one frame and not in another frame. And along the way, between the retina that sees everything to you consciously saying, yeah, I see it's the engine that disappears and appears, you're losing information. I think all of you know it, but not that I'll show you another one. Here's a little harder one. Same idea. If you look at the first one, I didn't know it, another one. Now you believe it that there's something that changes. And I'm telling you right now that in your brain, there's the answer. So somewhere in your earlier kind of visual processing, there are neurons that see the difference between the leaf that appears, the branch of leaf that appears appear. But along the lines, between those leaves to your conscious percept, you lost it. And the question is, where along the way is this moment where information kind of disappears? And why? Why is the brain choosing to remove information from us? Now, no better example in my mind, there is no way, as you all know, of the, I just spoiled it, the gorilla experiment. You probably all know it if you took any psychology classes, so there's no point in even presenting it, but just for the sake of showing it, I'm going to show you now, you can all look at this thing, a famous clip from like 2010 now, people tossing a ball between them, there's two teams, white team, black team. You're supposed, if you're a subject in this experiment, in a classic, to count how many throws are between the white team players, and probably miss the fact that the gorilla entering the screen, making itself very visible and going outside. Now, all of you probably know this clip, so nothing is surprising to you. But if you're kind of classical psychology student who have seen the original clip, you probably missed that this one is actually a modified version of that. And in this one, there are changes that you may have not seen. One of them is that the curtain in the beginning was red and it turned green halfway through, and one of the three characters wearing black actually disappeared. So at the end of the clip, there are only two people crossing the point, and one of them disappeared. So even if you know this one, we can think of a way to make this clip such that people who are experts will still miss something. And I see multiple versions, all of them work on me at least. Even if I know that there's some kind of problem there and I look for it, as gorilla, I notice the curtain, I would miss that there's maybe something flying. You also saw the seagull flying by. So when I learned about this clip now 15 years ago, I thought how crazy and amazing it would be to actually look at the brain of someone when they're looking at this clip for the first time and basically see what just happened to you when you saw the engine appearing and disappearing, but monitor it in the brain. So really be able to kind of see the information in all the pathways from the neurons, from the kind of cells in your retina that actually capture the photons from the engine to the next part where in V1, you see that it's being processed to, I don't know, the frontal eye field, and it can identify this one place. The brain essentially has the information streaming, and it says up to here. One neuron before the engine is there, one neuron after, it's no longer there. see where is this part decides for us what's going to be the bottleneck, what's going to go up and what's going to remain below, and can I tweak that? Can I get to see more of the world, or kind of maybe move the bottleneck? And to me, this was kind of an idea that would be cool to do research. Clearly, nearly impossible to do. It requires having a human with electrodes inside her head that are located exactly in the regions where all of this information is kind of streaming and disappearing. It would have to have electrodes that actually code the gorilla or the basketball player, so we can really kind of trace all the information. We have to have a stimulus, if it's not a gorilla, that really activates something like the engine before and after, and you have to know that you're seeing engine. It will be kind of nearly impossible to create such a condition where you find a person with this setup that you can really study their brain. But I thought it's like a kind of beacon or like something to aim. This would be a great way to study consciousness. You could actually follow information and see where is it that the brain chooses to eliminate that information. Okay, this is a moment to, for a second, step out and just kind of mention what Jonathan said about the type of work that I do methods-wise. So you see kind of why I'm talking about electrodes in the brain. Indeed, my kind of field of research in neuroscience is mostly what we call single neuron encoding in humans. Typically, neuroscientists study the brain either using imaging methods in humans, so you put the brain in fMRI or in EEG, or with animals, we really open the brain and put electrodes inside. It's very uncommon to do the combination of both, but this is what I've been doing for the last couple of years. We have access to patients whose brain we get to open with electrodes inside to understand how thinking works in a human that can actually respond to that. It used to be very rare when I began. Now, even in every university I go to, including UCSP, there is some group that does that, so it's not as rare. If you've never seen it, the mechanism looks pretty much like that. You have a person who has epilepsy. That's, I would say, the majority of the patients we get to work with. With epilepsy, they don't respond well to medications. So kind of the last resort, if you want, is for them to have surgery, where a surgeon is going to open their brain, expose the skull, put the electrodes deep inside, keep the electrodes connected to their brain and to a machine for a period of about 2-3 weeks. In the period of that time, we're going to temper the medications to nearly zero, and presumably they're going to have multiple seizures in the hospital, where now we can trace and triangulate the location of the seizures onset, take the electrodes out, resect the part of the brain that starts the seizures, and send them away, presumably seizure-free. That's the kind of clinical setup, which looks something like that. This is a more conventional type of single neural encoding, where you put the sheet of electrodes on the surface of the brain. What we're doing for the last 15 years is actually using depth electrodes, which go very deep inside the brain. So we look at structures that are a lot kind of more inside the brain, where internal, if you want, or a lot of the thoughts happen. Either way, it's very similar. Open the brain, put the electrode inside, and from the perspective of the outside, you have a human being, wires inside, open brain, the wires are going to the computer. You can put a laptop in front of them and say, take an experiment for a few minutes, and let's kind of see if you can correlate the visual images or the replay or the questionnaire you answer to some activity in your brain. You probably have seen many of the kind of classic papers that came from your school. Maybe the most classic paper kind of summarizes the result in one visual is the one from 2008, where one patient was sitting in the lab. What you see here in the right top corner are the images that you're seeing. So those are short clips. And what you're going to hear are the sound of one neuron in their brain. You probably think this before, I hope.
I have a dream that one day.
Hey, it's Dad. Right on time.
The so-called Simpson neuron in this brain, with one neuron that fired whenever she saw pictures of, or clip in this case, of the Simpson. And I think what's important about those neurons, that again, I imagine that many of you have seen versions of that in textbooks by now. What's I think important about those neurons is that they code not this particular clip of the Simpson, but they code the concept of the Simpson. So they would fire for any clip of the Simpson. They would fire for the text of the Simpson, for me saying the word Simpson or mentioning something in the Simpson. And they would even, and that's more important for the part of the talk, they would fire if she closes her eyes and just imagine Simpsons by herself. So if we came back to her in the afternoon and say, forget about seeing things, just close your eyes and recall from your mind things you've seen earlier. At some point, she's going to recall the Simpsons. And what you see is that the cell fires the same way. In fact, fires a second and a half before she speaks the words. So we can see her thoughts coming to her. So this kind of work in itself became critical to us having access to something unique. We have access to a thought in near real time, and sometimes what I call real time is actually real time from the neuron's perspective. So we can see the thoughts emerging seconds before the experience of the thought actually materializes in this patient. These neurons became very famous. I'll walk you in really a short minute and a half over the methods that all of the studies with the patients always follow to understand how it works. Patients show up on day 0. The surgeon opens their brain, put the electrodes, they get surgery, and then they go to the hospital. They get to recover in day 1, and day 2 in the morning they get to meet me. We show up. I usually have an audience with them for about an hour. So I ask them questions about their preferences when it comes to music, politics, movies, anything that I can ask, and use this information to build a data set of about 100 images that correspond to the things they care about. So if they say that they vote for the Democrats, I would put a picture of Kamala Harris or Barack Obama. If they say that they really like Beatles, I would put a picture of John Lennon. If they say they really are afraid of spiders, I would put a picture of a spider. We basically try to build a data set tailored to this person's interest and field and preferences, and then they show up to an experiment where we show them basically those 100 images 6 times each over 30 minutes, and what they see is a picture on the screen. They have to press space to move to the next picture, and the bottom line is the pictures are repeated again and again, and we can do statistics on what it makes them respond. So for example, if this is the kind of series of pictures that they've seen, maybe we look at neuron number 1 in the brain, and what you see here in white are the spikes. So this neuron fired twice when the picture of Albert was on the screen, once when the picture of this actress on the screen, once when the picture of this twice a spider, and so on. But then maybe 3 more times when this picture of Halle Berry appears again. Maybe neuron number 2, say this one in a different part of the brain, fires in this sequence when the picture on the screen. Seems like again it's kind of random. But maybe neuron number 3 in the amygdala, for example, has this very clear pattern of all the spikes happen when the picture of Halle Berry appears again and again. And you can say, hey, this cell might have to do with something that has to do with Halle Berry. Let's look at it more carefully. You put the picture of Halle Berry, you take all in this neuron and all the appearances compared to all other pictures, and you say, oh, we found something. Here is a neuron that seems to respond to a picture of Halle Berry. It's on the screen, this neuron fires in a different pattern activity compared to everything else. The work of my colleague Rodrigo Quiroga from now 2005 essentially mapped this in one and several follow-up work. We show that those neurons fire not just for one picture, but they fire invariantly to any picture, including cartoon images, including a picture of Halle Berry wearing a cat suit, which the patient knew was Halle Berry, including the text Halle Berry, and many, many other versions of that. So the point, to kind of get you all on speed, is that we find easily, after a day or two with the patients, many of those neurons. Not many, several of those neurons. Every patient, we show them 100 pictures, and we find several neurons whose concept we can understand. And this now is the bedding for everything that's going to come later on in the experiment. What I spent a lot of time in the lab when I just joined is trying to make this fast. So I automated the process, so it's happening in real time. And essentially what we did is instead of having to select the images out offline, set of images and so on, what I did is made it automatic. So the patient tells me something and I start showing pictures live. And whenever I see that picture gets some kind of response, I immediately download many more of them and show it again and again to really kind of make the concept. And if a picture gets no response a few times, you take it out. So in the same amount of time, you can really build a robust set of pictures that this can respond to, and you can start use that to build some kind of a mapping, not just kind of what one cell fires to, but hey, can we see some hierarchy and connection between those neurons? This is my work with the point of real time being an ability to just read the thoughts faster, but also to kind of decode things from the patient's eye. What they like to see as a game is a thought that they think appearing on the screen in front of them. And to them, patients, this was a remarkable moment where whatever you think, we decode in real time and we show it on the screen, and you get to play games of like showing your thoughts on the screen, which to us was a kind of step towards being able to do everything you want in real time. So patients can get to play with their brain. Honestly, all the things I showed you right now are things that they could elicit by themselves. So it's easy to think of Halle Berry and have the picture of their puppy on the screen. It's a bit harder to think of sadness and have a neuron in parts of the brain that correspond to, say, something for sadness, and then actually it appearing on the screen. So the electrodes we had were in parts of the brain that I would say have to do with things that you are able to connect to activate. When it becomes interesting is when we start to move the electrodes into the back of the brain, where we find neurons that correspond to things that you normally don't have access to. And that in a second. Okay, back to where we are. So I said to you, my dream was to have this person that has electrodes in her brain that can see the picture of the movie of the gorilla and not know the movie and so on. All of those things. This is where kind of the message to the graduate student, I think, would be the message number one. Sometimes luck helps your career. Exactly what happened. So one day, 2007 or 8, we had a patient show up to the lab. We look at her brain, and among the 100 pictures we showed to her, we typically show the pictures of animals. We found a cell in her brain that responds to pictures of gorilla. I said, hey, we remember this clip from years ago. How cool would it be if she doesn't know this clip? Now, all of you in the room knew this clip. So you would be her. Or it happens to be that we found the one woman in the world. And I just kind of did here all the statistics that in the paper we showed really nicely. What are the chances of finding a person who didn't see this clip? It's already like there's only one in the world that didn't see this clip. We found this woman. And then to happen to find in her brain also to have the person with epilepsy that doesn't respond with medications, which makes her the candidate for this particular surgery, to land of the entire world in the clinic where we did the surgeries, for us to put the gorilla picture in the desk that happened to find a cell that fires for it. Basically, I know for this talk, I kind of try to look at all kinds of ways to depict the statistics. It's as if you were hit by a lightning and then hit by a crocodile twice a day. All chances of basically winning lottery. So it's very, very unlikely, but we happen to find this one thing. And maybe message number 2 to graduate students. This next 10 minutes are all going to be about the value of n equal 1. This is one patient. We knew right away there's not going to be any other patient like this. And we knew that once we tell her about the gorilla, it's over. We have really a short window of time to try something with her. And if it works, we're going to be able to do what I dreamt of doing, which is actually trace the movement of information in the brain until it disappears. Otherwise, it's gone. Never going to happen again. So this is the value of n equal 1. Okay, patient S292 is this magical patient with whom we had electrodes placed in different locations. I'm going to focus on the electrode that is placed near the amygdala, but you'll see some mention of other electrodes. But I should say, just for a kind of a important note to come back to that in the future, the electrodes you put are rigid, so it's like a straw that you put deep inside the brain. You kind of penetrate the brain tissue and go all the way in, but they're hollow. And so through the hollow shaft, we can put those little microelectrodes that kind of go through and fan out. The 8 microelectrodes within each macroelectrode, we call them. And the microelectrodes are the ones that pick the neuron activity, so they're very, very fine. And there are also contacts. Those are the yellow, light, white sphere. There are also contacts that are much more big throughout the electrode itself. So the fan at the very end picks up electrodes, but the contacts throughout pick other type of activity, which we call EEG if you're on the outside, or local field potential if you're inside. But we basically have 2 types of data. We typically, in the lab, focus solely on the very tip, because this is the magic. This is something you can't get anywhere else. It's the neurons in the human brain. I'm going to show you that just deciding to look at the other contacts ended up being as important as the kind of cool data that we looked at. Okay, so what is the experiment? It's very simple. First, we show to this woman a bunch of pictures that we always do, where she sees pictures of birds and dogs and the gorilla and other things, that we make sure that we find one cell in her brain that fires, but she's a gorilla. Then we show her the clip. Famous clip where you see the gorilla passing through in the middle of the clip and making itself visible and then disappearing. And we ask her the question, how many throws were there in the clip? And she gives an answer. And maybe, if you didn't see the gorilla once, we can say, let's do it again. Let's do the clip a second time, and you count throws again. And maybe you're lucky, she wants to see the gorilla a second time, and maybe a third time, and we can see how many times can we show her the clip without her not seeing gorilla, before we say, okay, now that you see the gorilla, let's show you the same clip several times with the gorilla in, and just kind of compare how the brain looks before and after. And then we'll do what we call the not aware trials and the aware trials. And once you capture gorilla, we'll also do kind of one round of showing you the pictures again to make sure that we didn't lose anything. So essentially, the design is experiments where we show you pictures to make sure that everything is good. With in between, multiple tries, as many as we can, where you see the same clip and try to see, can we trace how the brain works when it comes to that. Here is just kind of to show you the activity. This is the one neuron in the right amygdala that fires for the gorilla. What you see here in time 0 is the onset of the picture. This is maybe second of the image in the screen, and you see that in every one of 12 trials, there's another activity about 300 milliseconds after the picture appears on the screen by this neuron, the gorilla, was then fired for a picture of a TV series that you liked, a place that you visited, or a movie that you liked. So this is one neuron that codes clearly the visibility of a gorilla and nothing else. I'll say right away, once we found this neuron, we came back and we could test before we start the experiment other gorillas, and what we found is this is what we call the gorilla neuron. So it fires for different types of gorillas, similar patterns, but not to anything. So not to other animals, not to an actor, not to other people that she knows. So she really fires for gorillas, but not a single gorilla. Fires for any gorilla. This is what we termed for our kind of ease of conversation, the gorilla neuron with these particular properties. Then notice it takes about a third of a second to actually fire. That's pretty slow. So it's too slow for the brain to use this as the detector for gorillas, but it's definitely coding gorilla in some way, shape, or form. Okay. So now I'm going to show you what is the gorilla neuron doing in all of the trials where the patient was seeing the clip and the gorilla was on the screen. So we had 2 short times. We could show the woman the clip of the gorilla and she doesn't notice it before we told her in a way that there's a gorilla there, and then had 3 more trials where we showed her the clip and now she looks at the gorilla. So what you see here are the first try when she doesn't know the gorilla there. Basically, there's no activity. So the gorilla neuron doesn't fire. This neuron is somewhere on the stream in a place that responds to if you don't know it, you don't fire. So this neuron, what it fires is what you know. It's the conscious perception, and then there's other trials where she now sees the gorilla. This is the moment in the kind of time where the gorilla enters the screen. Once you know there's the cell that codes gorillas actually fires. So to know gorillas manifested in this particular example. Okay. Now, we found in the same patient other neurons in a different part of the brain. Actually, this category of neurons appeared in many locations. We couldn't say it has to do with something. I didn't say something that I think is just relevant for those of you who really care about this particular line of research. It's not uncommon for us to find animal cells in the right amygdala. We have one paper that's just about that shows that oftentimes, if I show patients animals or animal-like entities, like Yoda falls in this category, and Shrek falls in this category, anything that is animal-like gets a response in the right amygdala. So we knew that this kind of finding a gorilla neuron isn't out of the ordinary. We find them a lot of times. What is out of the ordinary is finding several neurons of the same category scattered in the brain. Those neurons fired in a special moment. They fired after the clip is already over. When you're asked to think of the clip backwards and answer the question how many throws were. So the screen is black now and you just have a text, how many throws were there? And you think back of the clip and so on, those neurons fired only this particular window of time. So the clip is basically over and you start thinking. It sometimes happens right when the black screen appears, sometimes just before, but when the clip is over and you're about to think, it appears. And what's special about those neurons is that they seem to fire irrespective of the task. So those neurons fire both in the unaware trials, when you don't know there's a gorilla there, or there's a aware trial, they kind of constantly fire. We call those, and this is controversial if you want, we call those the rumination neurons. They appear when you ruminate. Now, I should say, and this is why I'm saying controversial, I should say that we have no idea what the patient was doing in this moment. And call it rumination, it could be that it responds to black screens, it could respond to thinking about basketball, I don't know. But we just call them for the sake of ease of conversation between us. Gorilla neuron is easy, fires on the gorilla. Rumination fires when you ruminate. In the period of rumination. I don't know what the neuron actually codes for. But they appear in every trial when you start to ruminate. And even though it seems like they fire regardless of unaware or unaware, they actually seem to have differences. So when we quantified the difference between those neurons firing when you already know that there's a gorilla there or not, we see a difference in the latency and duration. So there's some differences in the properties of those. So they seem that even though those neurons fire throughout, they still change the properties a little bit. When you know that's a gorilla and you kind of look back at the clip and you say, I don't really care about throws because that's not what the task is about, versus let's really think about what I've seen. Okay, so we have rumination neurons, we have gorilla neurons. Now, the way we designed the experiment is we didn't really tell the patient, hey, let's tell you something. You shouldn't really count throws, look for the gorilla in the center. We didn't just reveal. What we did is we showed her halfway through the experiment after basically 2 trials, which is the movie, we showed her a bunch of pictures. So here you're gonna see now a bunch of pictures as before. Pictures of a gorilla, pictures of a bird, picture of a dog. And one of the pictures we showed her was a picture from the clip, now a still frame with the gorilla in the center doing this. So we kind of showed her what she missed. But now, no, the context is not look at throws, you just see a picture, and now she realizes, hey, this frame is in the clip I've just seen, I missed it. So we didn't really kind of, we had a kind of very clear latency of the moment she gets the reveal. what we did here is besides looking at the gorilla neuron, when she sees the gorillas, we looked at what happens to this neuron and others in the particular picture that we call the plane from the peak. She sees the gorilla, but also realizes that it's part of the kind of experiment. And you found a neuron that's in the same electrode, so it's one of the ones that fan out in the right amygdala, but it fires only for this flame. So this neuron doesn't fire for gorillas category. We fire for one specific gorilla, the one that kind of is the one that I missed before. We call it the clip gorilla neuron or the aha neuron. I like the aha, but no one else kind of accepted it as a term. But the point is that there's one neuron that is special. It kind of goes one layer down from gorillas as a category to this particular gorilla in this particular picture. Okay, so now after she knows that the gorilla there, we can compare not just the kind of activity of gorillas, we can look at things like latency and duration of this neuron, like gorilla special to gorillas as a category, and we can start doing things along the lines of looking at latencies and what changes, like and without kind of going too much into the mechanics of it, I would say that one interesting thing we saw is that there seems to be that the gorilla classic neuron fires at 370 milliseconds, so it takes a third of a second, and gorilla special fires about 100 seconds or 80 milliseconds later. You can start suggesting that maybe there's a hierarchy here. Maybe the brain first says, okay, gorillas, and then double click gorilla special, and maybe I don't know, there could be others that we didn't see, but we can start suggesting that maybe there's a kind of a cascade of actions that figure. And the best way we find to do that is basically said, let's take those two neurons, neuron gorilla classic and neuron gorilla special, and see how far apart are the spikes at the time. Not just on average 470, 370, but let's look for every time that neuron one spikes, how much time it takes for neuron two. And we have to do a very simple analysis of like the difference between spikes in all of the trials where there are spikes. The bottom line is there's a clear distance that's unique from all other spikes to the gorilla clip neuron to the gorilla. So essentially, they fire at a very kind of specific fixed time apart. This really hints that there's some kind of mechanism that says, first you know this, and now you know this other one, and they're really kind of talking to each other. Okay. Now, this speaks to a broader thing that the group where I was part of was looking at, which is let's kind of try to basically build a hierarchy of how the brain processes information. There's a famous paper in apes that called the speed of sight that essentially maps kind of how much time it takes for activity from the retina to get to the V1, to FVF, to and so on. And we had now for the first time ability to kind of start building a similar pattern in humans. We have work that I mentioned before that looks at animals, neurons. In the right amygdala specifically, we have a different work that looks at place cells in the brain, so how much time it takes for a neuron to fire. If I show you a picture of the pyramid in Giza or the Eiffel Tower, we had the work of Rodrigo that tried to look at the same image, just different modalities, how much time it takes a neuron to fire if it got there from the ears versus from the eyes versus from the nose. So the same time buried just came from different modalities, then you can build this kind of hierarchy of which structures seem to come afterwards. And we had work that just look at latencies of neurons altogether, like how much time it takes for a neuron immediate to fire. But the hippocampus, all of this together allows us to start to look at what I call the kind of the holy grail, if you want, of what I wanted before, which is trying to build kind of a map of information coming from the senses until you see it. And hippocampus is where I kind of would say that's when you have a neuron that corresponds perfectly with what you see. So if you see gorilla, this neuron fires. If you don't see it, doesn't fire. And we can see, okay, those neurons are the ones that fire whether you know the gorilla is there or not. So there are neurons that fire every time it's a gorilla on the screen, and there's the one that fires only when you know that there's a gorilla. See, so we can see, okay, somewhere between here and here lies this black box that I care about that decides to kind of say up to here, all the neurons fire. From here on, I'm gonna eliminate it. So finally, we kind of zooming in on this thing that Francis Crick was interested in, which is this police officer that says, okay, I might not be the guy who decides, but up to me, all the neurons fire for everything. And just after me, only things that I get to, that I say thumbs up, get to pass. So close to what I care about when it comes to consciousness, sits somewhere here. Now, if you really believe that there's this site here that does this thing, it should be not one neuron, or unlikely to be just one neuron that really kind of on-off consciousness. It should be a site with more neurons. If that's the case, you should look at the network, not at neurons. And here we go back to this, I told you before about the electrodes having tips at the end that look at neurons, but also contacts that can show you the network. So what we did afterwards, we said, like, if you look at the activity, those are the spikes, those the big peaks above the red line, those are the spikes. And we typically, in the lab, first thing we did is we ignored the EEG part, the part that is kind of like, depends on the network. But now let's the opposite. Let's ignore the spikes. Now let's look at the temperatures and see what was the network. And without diving into it to really kind of go through explanation of how it works, we could look at the last trial where you don't see the gorilla. This is the last trial of the unaware trial. Trial number 2. And what you see here is time. And here you see the time where the gorilla basically appears on the screen, disappears, and you see the questions. If you just look at the power and frequency, you basically won't see a difference. But if you compare that to the trial that happens just after you know, so this time you are aware, you see that there's different activity, different power spectrum manifests when the person now knows that there's a gorilla there at the level of the network. So this means that for the neuron that kind of fires on off at the hippocampus, somewhere the entire network around it responds to the activity and tells it maybe you should fire on. Now to really land what I just said and not just hand wave it, what we need to do is one more thing. We need to say, okay, what is the connection between the network, as in the activity of all the neurons that we can keep in contact, and this one cell in the spikes? There's a method that a colleague of mine did first in humans. We put this out in a paper in 2010 in Nature, where he showed that if you actually look at the activity of the network, and you link it to one individual spike, and you see that in this example, the spike always lands at the peak of the kind of sine wave of the network, then in his case, it was a memory task, you can predict what's going to be remembered. So he showed people pictures, patients, pictures, and every time that the picture was there and the spikes landed exactly at the top of the wave, at the sine wave, then people afterwards remembered the picture that they saw, and every time it wasn't, people didn't remember it. So he basically used a method that was used before in apes, but never in humans, to show that the link between the network and a single spike can predict behavioral components, like in this case, memory. We said that would be the kind of the full narrative. This means for the spikes to somehow land perfectly in, say, the same peak of the activity of the EEG, means that the network has to organize itself. So the network has to see the movie is running in real time, and the network has to start firing or activity in the right mode to make sure that the spikes work. So what we basically looked at different frequencies and landed up on alpha and theta being the one that actually matter. What we do is we ask the question, what I just said before, is the spike, that's the spike in red, landing always in the same location over the full 360 degrees sine wave. And the quick answer would be, I'm going to show you right now the clip moving. Each of those blue dots is one neuron. And what you see here is there would be many spikes who would land at any given moment in different locations, but we take the center of mass. So if there are spikes that land here, 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 and here, we say, okay, let's take the mean mass, kind of the center. What I'm going to show you essentially is what happens to the alignment between the spikes of this one neuron that codes persons, that knows that there's something there, and the entire network. And you can imagine that the message would be that as kind of look at the red thing and where it points, like the kid moves forward, this is the moment where the players play basketball. This is the second moment where the gorilla appears, what you see here. So a lot more spikes would be basically aligned with the period at 300 so goes to the end of the moment and then goes back. So you see basically two clusters of moments. When you see the gorilla and you're aware that it's there, there's some kind of alignment between the spikes of this one neuron and that network that comes before. As if the network somehow facilitates the firing of the neuron in the right moment. We quantified it in different ways, but maybe the simplest way I can show you that is you can see that if you look at the changes in the alignment of spikes and neurons during the relation period, no changes in the beginning of the clip, in the basketball thing, no change. But the gorilla appearance, the empty circle, is the alignment before you know that there's gorilla there, and after you know. Both alpha and theta, the bottom line is the network seems to change itself to align with awareness. So somewhere there, between the last amygdala neuron and the first hippocampus neuron, lies this police officer that aligns the information so you become aware of it. Now, we didn't find this one neuron or this one network, but we now can zoom in into a very, very narrow time and place in the brain to think this is where it happens. So the message for me is to look at the activity of all those cells and all those sites, and you kind of know what they're coded for. You can build a hierarchy that says first you fire for animals, and then for gorillas, and for clip gorilla, and we know when it happened, and we know what parts. You can build this thing that says, okay, I know that in the 100 milliseconds between 370 to 480 in these particular sites, the network and the spikes somehow tell you that you're going to be aware of this. This is the bottleneck of consciousness. And this aligns with exactly the same work that was done in animal that shows kind of the hierarchy. This is the Van Essen diagram of vision that shows exactly where information is streaming and when it gets to the hippocampus, the last part in this diagram, the hippocampus, when the monkey becomes aware of something. Okay. Now, here's my second point to the graduate student. This project. I have until time. Yeah. Kind of look at time. Oh yeah. This project was a project that was the data. This project was recorded in 2008 or 9 or something like this. This wasn't recorded. It was only one patient. I didn't really think there's going to be something to find there because it's like one patient, and I put it in the corner and forgot about it. And when I forgot about it, I also kind of moved away from this type of research. And the first time I looked at it was during COVID. So 2021, when a student in a business school came to me and said, like, I'm looking for a tech project. Do you have data that you can use? And I have tons, thousands of experiments that we ran once with one patient or one trial, and we kind of did it excited one day, but forgot about it. And they're sitting there and all of it. This, I think, interesting paper came up in the several months of him choosing to do it. And he himself wasn't a neuroscientist. He cares about business. And he has this theory that businesses that have a very serious parallel organization where you break the business into models, and like the human resource team does things independently with its own, so to speak, CEO, and the finance does things separately, and there's no central unit that speaks to them, but they all work in concert and so on. This leads to better businesses. And what he does, he basically goes to companies and he asks for them to give them all his emails. He looks at the entire email server of the company, the other communication, and he predicts which companies will do worse or better financially based on how they interact as a big brain communication. So he applied the same, you care about this, I put a from this is my way of, this is my thing of business. So I mentioned business. People kind of working in field and moving. But I think that what he made me think was that there's a value in coming with a different space of thinking and finding some parallels between, for example, how a company works. And he shows that companies work the same way, that kind of modules are more efficient and they have better results than ones that have a very kind of serial validation. To, in a way, similarly, how people, animals working together. This is a work of a colleague of mine, Jan. You see on the clip. All the time. This is a work of Jan Kozin where he basically asks the same question. He says, you have a flock of birds, they fly together, and at some point they're gonna fork into two groups. How do they decide? Is there a leader? Is there one bird that goes right against everyone else and they all together? Or it requires some of them? And he shows the same result. He basically shows that unless you have in randomness several birds at the same time pick a different location, and the number has to be very specific to kind of break the group to two, then the group just abandons the two that separate. So kind of in a hand-wavy way, I think that I see some parallels between how brains of large organizations, be a flock of birds or a school of fish, organizations like business organization, and the brain operate to afford information to flow in the most efficient way, and still kind of make sure that what the before and after shows is the most kind of clear. So my take on that is that the nice thing about having electrodes in the brain is one that you can actually get access to parts of the brain that normally don't get access to. But more than that, you can move the electrode in the parts of the brain that the person normally gets no access to, and give them feedback from this part of the brain. The cool thing to do is to say, hey, I'm going to give you enough feedback from part of the brain that controls your breathing. And you're going to now see activity on the screen that corresponds to how well parts that are very, very kind of under the hood for you responds to you breathing. Change that. Try to do something. Hold your breath, doesn't change it. Try to think about things and see if there's anything that you can do that essentially lets you control neurons that are far behind the where you normally get access to. Just glossing over that, we find ways to essentially connect the neurons networks. One of the brain that you normally have no access to, make it play games like this. So then the spaceship goes up and down based on activity of neuron that normally you have no control over. Try to make the spaceship go up. And in doing so, we teach you through feedback how to get access to neurons that supposedly are not part of the, if I look at this pie chart that I do here, this is what we normally control. If I want to raise my hand, it always works, 100%. But if I want to make myself feel sad because something happened, it doesn't always happen. Sadness kind of goes on. I don't control my sadness like a switch, turn sadness on, then off. Sadness sits somewhere here. I can control the input, the sadness and information, but sadness kind of, there are neurons that fire here. I just don't control them. So now with these electrodes, we can kind of teach people to do things that I think are more interesting. The most interesting one, scientifically, and I think psychologically, is this one. I'll tell you first what we see here. Okay, this is an illustration. It's not the real patient. It's just because I couldn't show the patient because we're filming. Otherwise, I would show you the real patient. But if this goes online, I think I'm in trouble. We brought patients to the lab, and we put electrodes in the part of the brain that essentially supplemental area that comes to life sometimes a second, if not very many hundreds of seconds before they move their hands. Classical limit experiment, right? So you watch the clock and you're supposed to stop it, and we have neurons that tell us in a third of a second she's gonna stop the button, and it's before she would know. Then those patients, we're gonna do something like this. You're gonna put a little box in front of you, and this box has two buttons, one on the right, and one on the left. They're gonna ask you to press the button whenever you want. So you sit there, you have half an hour, whenever you want, press the buttons. When you press one of the buttons, a light's gonna turn on. This light tells you, patient, that we're now saving data from your brain. So it's gonna take a second for this data to be saved, and then another trial is gonna begin. But what's important is when the lights are on, don't touch it. Otherwise, it's gonna kind of miss the experiment and you're gonna ruin it. So when the lights are on, just wait for it to turn off and then you do it again. But really what we're doing is we find some neurons in her brain that tell us that she is gonna press a button in about half a second. And when we do, we turn the lights on just before she presses the button. So effectively what she does is she presses the button and there's a big buzzer. We say, what did you do? Just with the experiment. We ask you not to press the button when the lights are on. What did you do? I'm so sorry, doctor. I kind of thought it's going to happen, but never mind, try again, but make sure you don't do it. And basically every time she wants to do it, it's happening. So from my perspective, it's a cool thing. From my perspective, that every time she wants to do it, it's happening just before, and she tries to trick us to do it faster, or to kind of go to the right and then to the left. Nothing works, but we're in her brain. So whenever she knows, I'm a second ahead of her. But that's the interesting part, I think, is a cool demo. What's interesting for me is a different twist that we had, and this one is the one that I think right now is the most interesting to analyze. If I know it's T0, that at T1, I want to press the button. I can wait to T1 minus half a fraction of a second and then turn the lights on just when she presses the button. And then I'm going to get the cool effect where she's pressing it and there's a buzzer and I move it. But I can also turn the lights on now when I know it, a second before she's pressing the button. And then if it's far enough, by turning the lights on happens so far from her pressing the button that she might not even know that she would want to press the button. So I interfere with her decision to do something without her knowing. So it's me and her brain talking about her behind her back. And the only evidence I have that it's actually working after several trials of me turning the lights on. So what she sees is like lights turning on and off, and she says, I don't know what's going on, it's like there's a problem. So I don't want to press a button, so the lights are on just by themselves. But what I know is that those lights are the indicator for me that her neuron wanted to do something. And if I just wouldn't turn the lights on, she would want to do it. So by me multiple times stopping her from wanting something, the neuron starts to stop working. So what we see is that after several trials where the neuron tells the brain to do something and the brain doesn't do it, the reinforcement, the neuron is, I guess it's not working, let's stop working. So we see that the neurons, we can turn the neurons in her brain off just by making them do what they want to do without the actions manifesting. And psychologically, I think that's where I now spend most of my time in this experiment. It's just interesting to see what happens to people. And I think I mentioned it to someone yesterday. It's interesting to see what happens psychologically to people who get to experience something that we all can imagine but not really experience, the lack of free will. So all of us can imagine and understand that maybe there's something in our brain that precedes our actions, but we don't really live life like this. We live life in real time. So if you repeatedly go to a restaurant and you're told there are 3 options on the menu: steak, a salad, and a salmon. And you choose whatever you want. And you're about to say, I want a steak. And before you say it, the waiter says, oh, just by the way, no steak. Say, oh, strange, I was going to say that. Never mind. I'm going to choose the, no, there's no salmon also. So whatever you want to do, it's taken away from you. What experience that I looking at right now is we just have an interview. And you ask a question like, do you believe in God? What does it make you feel about like punishment and crime? And what we see is that in the course of this half an hour, when they get to experience lack of free will multiple times, they actually change the perspective. So they kind of take a survey before and after, and they already say, you know what? Something strange about like, so in a very short time, they have some, I don't know, this is very, very kind of me, it's just saying it, not a number, but I think what we see more and more is that the experiment itself changes in small group of patients, something like the perception of kind of free will, because they get to viscerally experience the lack of. Okay, so now I should show you. So I'll skip saying the same thing in different ways. And bottom line is that we now gradually move the electrodes in the brain in various locations. And we keep finding that if you move it back into the brain and you give people access to this part of the brain, you can help them behaviorally manifest different things. A colleague of mine, Ronnie Paz in Israel, now took it one step further. He gives patients access to the neurons that manifest some of their trauma. And same methods, electrodes in the brain and so on, and he uses it for therapy. And he, along with a colleague who's a psychiatrist, are essentially developing a protocol for a company that they call Brain Value that tries to help people deal with trauma. You give them access to the part of the brain where far behind where the emotions manifest, and you say, look, the that you see is you feeling intense emotions when you think of the time that the tank exploded. Try to see if you can suppress the activity. The therapist is going to help you. To do this, you get a really good feedback that therapy works. So it's not just like therapy without any quantitative element. You get some version of psychiatric experience where someone on the back tells you, whatever we did right now, talking about this experience, reframing it and so on, work. Let's try again. And this, if it works, will become a method for action therapy where you give people access to their emotions. Okay. You want to have 8 more minutes? Yeah. That's story number 2. The thing I mentioned to you earlier about working thoughts came out in 2010, October 28th. Long story short, it was misunderstood by the media. And the perception people had of this paper was that we recorded dreams. We didn't. All the things we did was having patients sit there and think thoughts, and we showed the thoughts on the screen. But as a side note, we put at the very end of the paper that the same method that we used to decode people's thoughts could be used to decode people's emotions, memories, ruminations, and even dreams. It's just like a hypothetical thing. Somehow this sentence was lost, got a lot of attention. Before long, I was the face of science decoding dreams. This was the first article on BBC, came out that day, the recording is possible, and throughout the remaining 2 weeks, aligned with the fact that the movie Inception came out, aligned with people's interest in dream recording generally and so on, I became the face of dream recording. And I'm only saying that because I spent the 2 weeks from that moment onwards, telling to every reporter who asked me that dream recording is impossible, and we cannot do that, and that it's not what we did, and it's a mistake. Fortunately for science, one person in China and Japan didn't hear it. He got all the papers that showed that dream recording is possible without me saying it's impossible. So Yuki Kamitani in Osaka was the first person who read it. He was an office next to me at Caltech when he was a graduate student, and then he got professor in Japan. He saw our PR about one's dream recording with single neuron. He said, okay, if it worked with single neuron, I can get a grant to do it with fMRI. The first paper showed recording of visual content during sleep in 2013 by Kamitani as a response to a non-existent work that I spent a lot of time saying is impossible. Right now in the lab, most of what we do is we basically try to record dreams with patients. So after I said it's impossible, I had to eat my hat because all we do right now in the lab is various studies where we bring patients, we do the same mechanism that detects cells, and now have them go to sleep, and we try to see if we can present their dream on the screen and then show it to them when they wake up and see how good it is. The message here is I spent a lot of time saying something impossible. Now, first thinking that there's a poster that I have in the lab right now. I showed you the first part of it at the first slide. It says the difference between science fiction and science is timing. And to me, this story and the story of Limitless, I wish that all graduate students would be told that earlier. That those mistakes or the value of those is maybe going to be your career decision. So now we actually find in the morning in response to the Eiffel Tower, Bart Simpson, the Al Gore heroes. We teach the patients something that has to do with all of those concepts, tell them a story, we have to memorize the story, go to sleep. During sleep, supposedly they dream of those things because they see the same patterns of activity manifest as they were when they were up. We can wake them up and do things like try to decode what is the narrative, and then we say, okay, I think that his dream was of him going with his family member to the ocean and sailing a boat. We wake them up. We say, do you remember your dream? If they say yes, we ask them to tell the dream, and we see how good we are in decoding the same story that they tell. If they don't remember, we can tell them half the story. We say, okay, it starts with you, with your mom in the ocean, continue. And we'll see how good they are in actually continue the story the way we did. So finally, I think we have something that Freud and Jung and many people wanted, which is a real dream. person doesn't have to wake up and I ask them a question that is tainted by their awake self. They actually tell me a story that is really related to something that I know happened in their dream. So if they tell me a story about, say, them and their mom, and I saw their sister, I can say, hey, what's going on? Like, why are you seeing the person that I don't see? And I can start kind of the therapy becomes a little bit more kind of based on some cues that to me make it much more. Here is my last 4 minutes. I think you heard from Jonathan, I spent 10 years of my career as a hacker before I became a scientist, still very much informed by this mentality. And I think that if you really understand something, you want to either build it or break it. The last 4 years, what we do in the lab, mostly is like everyone else probably trying to build things with AI. So, okay, AI is this technology de jour. Can we actually start to apply all the things that we learned from looking at humans and machines, and I'll do it in a very fast way. One thing that we have that came out recently shows that AI is better in detecting cues when it comes to dating. So we have me and Claire go on a speed date. We have 5 minutes together, we chat, and afterwards we separate, and someone asks Claire, how much did you like Moran? 1 to 10. We ask Moran, how much did you like Claire? 1 to 10. And then we kind of ask to fill a survey of how likely we are to be a good match. Then we go on a date. If we both said we like each other, then after the date, we get asked again, kind of how much was the date good, and you want to do another one, and so on. We have all those kind of behavioral metrics. We put AI in the same place. So the date happens between me and Claire, and there's also Alexa in the corner, eavesdropping on us too. And the bottom line of this paper, just kind of as a hand wave, is that Alexa is much better at predicting what I would say, what Claire would say, and how much we would like to have a second and third date afterwards. AIs are really good in reading our cues. Primarily, they're better than humans. So if we give the same transcripts of Claire and mine date to a human, and say, human, here's a video of the date, here's a text of the date, try to predict whether Moran's gonna like her, whether Claire's gonna like him. There can be a second date. Humans are not as good at it. Claire and Moran are, of course, better, but not perfect in predicting how much we like. If I take, Claire says he's a 7, and I say, still, you have to go with you on a date. So the AI said you're gonna be a 10. Chances that Claire's gonna say, hey, actually, was surprised that he did better. So AI is very, very good in picking up cues, and the nice thing about AI, we can also ask it how you do it. So we can get lost on the slide, but we can get a variety of indicators that say, I think they're going to be a good match because they both laughed from this thing that was independent at the same time. And this is compared to others, something that they don't do. So AI is really good in picking humans very good. Another paper we had that came out just last year, there's the same thing with persuasion. Basically took marketing classic, where you try to convince people to buy something, but instead of having a creator person take a shampoo and build an ad for that, we gave AI the profile on the internet of the person. It built a personality psychology assessment of this person and built an ad for them and show it to them. And we could show in this work that we can sell a lot more, make a lot more clicks if we just have AI do human. So AIs are very, very good in reading us and figuring out what's going to work for us in terms of sales. And I guess the version of that you all know is LLMs. You probably all have access to chatbots. And if I ask you humans to complete the sentence, I bet you're going to be pretty good. So if I ask you, what comes after? I'm always dependent on the kindness of strangers, you'll be correct. So in your brain, you have like how it works. If I told you something like, I left New York City and after 6 hours of flying west, landed in Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, or California, LLMs do this very, very well. I'm going to give you 2 more examples. Italian chefs are known for their correct, or a complex story like Ben hates oats. He is forced to eat some. He is correct. Eugene hates Ben, so he feels. No, he hates Ben, so he feels. Sandra loves Ben, so she feels sad or angry. So the bottom line is that LLMs aren't just good in auto-completing. To do that, they actually somehow have to understand low-level psychology or geography or some kind of cultural references and so on. And we said if that's the case, then how good an LLM would be in theory of mind? One project with a colleague of mine, we basically took the classical Sellian experiment that you all know in psychology, where you tell people a story about a person hiding something and moving it away, and we have a question, where is it found? And we asked LLMs early on, if you tell you a story about Sally putting a ball somewhere, leaving the room, and moves the ball somewhere else, Sally comes back, we asked LLM 2 questions. Question 1, where is the ball? The LLM says, the ball is here. Great. Where would I look for the ball? She would look for it there. So LLMs are able to pass this test. Now, to be clear, it wasn't the case always. LLMs didn't pass it in GPT 3.5, in Claude version 3. So at some point they passed. So this ability to actually take those psychological tests and run them over time across models allows us to essentially ask the question, how old in development psychology is LLM. And we can basically see how each model becomes older, and we can now say that some of them are sponsored adult. And this allows us to do the project I'm doing right now. It's called Psych 101, where we took 100 years of psychology. And for each year, we took one seminal paper. So, the Ash conformity is the one I put here, 1951, and we say, let's replicate this experiment with AI. And answer the question, if I tell the AI, you're a student in which was 1951, you're in your 20s, you're most likely to be educated at that level and so on. Someone shows you these two pictures and asks if they're the same, and before you, 90% it's the same and so on. What will you answer? And we can start basically one by one looking at the answers and build a theory of how well can AI do humans. You can see here, if I'm just summarizing it, that there were a period of time where AIs did really well being humans, but mostly they're pretty poor. And sometime in the early 1990s, they became really, really good in being us. Now, it could be that the data that we feed AIs on the internet is more recent. It could be that something changed in psychology over those years, but now AIs can help us really get closer to understanding how the mind works by really teaching them how to do AI when they fail, to see what did they fail on, what information did they need in order to do better, and really get what I think would be the full kind of story of that, which is we study humans, we build it in AI, and we see when it fails what tweaks we need to do to get them to work together. There's this made-up graph that I created in my mind just before the day that kind of says where technology sits. This is how conscious it is. This is whatever the access is. And it says Walk is very unconscious. iPhone is a little bit more. AI sits somewhere here. Humans are up here, but humans that are dreaming maybe are below, and so on. A made-up graph. You can argue even with things and so on. But I think the question that I keep asking is if we can find this nice metric, how fast is AI climbing up those ladders, and what it takes for it to work? And in that sense, I think that the closure of this is that we're getting very good at it. So I put AI in the previous graph very low, but when I asked my colleagues where they put that, they all kind of have a different way, and some of them put AI much higher. I think it's already better than apes. I told you that in the few studies we did, it seems like it's operating like a 10-year-old kid in terms of development psychology studies where it sits and so on. So I think that we're getting to a place where we are building technologies that would seem to us like consciousness. And for my perspective, I put here from Alan Turing in the back, we kind of going back 100 years ago. If it looks like us, looks similar to us, the only difference between AI and us is we can actually also program and understand what it goes on. You would be very surprised if I now, after 1 hour, open my hand and wires would come up. You would think, oh, wow, we managed to really fool us. And I think if we start to build AI that do this job, well, finally, we're going to have the kind of complete answer about consciousness. I spent the last 4.5 years during Biden's administration and now for 3 months in Trump's session trying to help the administration answer the question, should AI be included in decision-making at a very high level, namely nuclear launch protocols? I put here a link to a paper that I think is speaking to it. And where I want to end is by saying that there's something to be said to us kind of studying this, trying to understand the brain and kind of being pure on why it works. But there's something that I think to me is a lot more the road when you are asked by someone senior, okay, all your decision making, help the president decide whether she should nuke Venezuela or not. And you have to kind of help develop a protocol for that. Or change the nuclear protocol right now to a different one. Suddenly you have to really say, okay, but we don't really know decision making. We just kind of talk about Bayesian analysis and what do you want from me? I think that to me, where I'm going to close is by saying that the last couple of years where I spent time working with companies, like the ones you see here, or implementing the research we do, putting it into a tool that can be actually used with humans, I felt that it was a sobering moment to kind of take the research and so I advocate in many ways, not necessarily to go to business school, but to find a way for everyone's research to not just end up in a paper, but in something that you can say, this is what it does and tested by humans in the real world. I told in the beginning, the last sentence, that during COVID, I went back to all the data and tried to dig in and start new things and so on. The other thing I did during COVID was I spent a lot of time trying to say, how do I make my science not just for the real world, also funny and interesting? And I wrote this book, Jonathan mentioned it, only I and Jonathan know about, and also Rene, there are only 5 copies of it exist. I have one here that I bought, but basically I said one cool thing to make science really work is to try to take it and make cartoon images of that. That's on the internet. You don't have to buy a book. But I think that to me, having to communicate science in a funny way so that my friends or my nephews, the kind of 9-year-old, understand the joke and so on, was a really good way to do something I told you before. You can start a company and really find a way to make science and put it in general. You can help the government or policymakers apply the research in a really relevant way. And you'll find if your research really works, not by p-value, but really if people use it a lot, you can try to make it funny and see if people find it, understand the jokes. And in doing so, you will say, okay, they got the joke because they understood the paper. It makes sense. And I think in many ways, my recommendation to students is to do at least one thing outside of plastic lab. Work on scripts, help a company, make cartoons, something that will force you to interface with the real world. Thank you.
Time for some questions.
Perfect. So let's start you. Thank you very much for the time. I know.
Can you say something about the hard problem?
So, here what I said, if you build a computer that acts like so you better than I not only on a computer. You know how it feels to build something. And the only reason you think that I'm conscious is because I look very much like you, I talk like you, I move like you, and you know what it is, and you apply it to me. I think once we start building machines that do that, they will have passed something about the we start building consciousness of them. I think that many of my colleagues in the companies I mentioned right now are focusing their efforts on embodiment, and they say all the AI already looks really cool and answers questions like you showed in this Psychology 101 experiment. They only pass test, but they still look like chatbot. And as long as they don't look physically like a human, you didn't move, very seamless way, so no one's gonna have a true belief in it. So the effort that they move to is building on Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, said that he, when he was a kid, imagined AI not as a chat, but as a friend that you talk to and so on. And he's putting his chip on building things. I think once we have something that looks good, a problem without us having to explain. Question there, yes.
Thank Moran for a thought-provoking talk. I think this question you get a lot, and I just want to hear what you say about that. I mean, with about 80 to 90 billion neurons and about 100 trillion connections in a human brain, right? A systems theorist would say, hey, are we going back now to the grandmother cell theory and want to learn something so complex like consciousness based on a few neurons? Or another aspect, what a system theorist would say, well, compare a living being, an organic property, let's say sponges or jellyfish that do not have a developed nervous system, but they do have distributed neurons. You can totally, there are papers out there, they show these neurons in a jellyfish encode salinity in water, and you can even trace the exact dynamics, but we all agree a jellyfish doesn't have consciousness. Huh?
I don't.
First of all, okay, would be so a survey that I would love to run if you want on you guys, but similar is to actually give you this kind of made-up graph and ask you to put jellyfish there. And I think we all probably gonna have the same bracket. No one's gonna be above human, but in a small you're gonna argue. And I think that would be kind of interesting. Someone answer to this, like, okay, maybe that's, and I think some people move the rock.
Are you one?
I put it 0, and they say no way. There's like something matter, and they so that's kind of not an answer, but that's like
So you reject the notion of an emergent property.
No, so I give you kind of just you. I think you're on the same page on the gap where you put it, but just to be clear, we're not the obvious kind of. There are people who disagree. I think where we now with that in mind, I think that I feel that there's something to scale. Going back to AI, the magic of AI was that they just threw a lot more compute. The problem that at some point it became not. It started the kind of started to look a lot more human. So from GPT 2.5 to 3.5, all that they did wasn't a different algorithm. It's still a transformer. They just threw more compute, and at some point it passed a threshold, and it suddenly passed the theory of mind test and so on. So if you take this applied to the brain, maybe that all it is you put a lot more neurons and you make them kind of process a little bit more, and that's the bar that is enough for me to think that you're like me and to think that you're conscious and like I feel that I'm special, so you're special too. And so maybe it's just like It would be like a threshold, and what's important? And not an answer, but like a final thought on that is, that it is magic that we find this kind of one neuron, gorilla neuron in a lake of billions of neurons and so on. I think here I would just resort to physics. I think that many. We happen to throw that in one part of the brain. We find a gorilla neuron and we are neuron and so on, and I don't think we find the one. We find one of, we can even estimate one of 5 million, and probably each of them fires for 12 different other things. So the gorilla neuron fires for also big in London. And I think that somewhere the mass, the scale isn't just kind of giving you, it also allows the brain to be very optimized. I think between optimization and scale, somewhere there, is probably just different than music. Or jellyfish. Yeah.
Of action of the limitless.
Oh, that's a great one. So it's science fiction, right? That's a great ending, right? So in the end, I made up. So we know that the fastest neurons are about 200 hertz. That's kind of, I just made up that the pill makes in process in 1000 hertz. So you just make it up. So if you just make up that neurons can process, suddenly what happens is like a fly. He's able to basically see the world yes, fly. Yes, this world. So the world is not working for him. It gives him enough time. The way he's just able to sit there for a minute and say, "Oh, he's going to run this way," and just like so, just like the mechanism, a little bit more of kind of coolness. But the bottom line is that the pill makes the process faster, and this not that wasn't but enough to speed time. It's not the problem. The end. Thank you very much.
That's really.